In all my years as a history teacher, I learned to believe in predictability. Each September, the new semester brought new classes, new promises, new challenges. Routine was a comfort. The classes, the tests, the parent-teacher meetings, the buzz of students in the hallways. I was Mr. Harris, and I believed I had already experienced every dramatic arc the school universe could throw at me. The rebellious student who straightens up, the shy one who blossoms, the genius who loses his way. I thought life, especially school life, followed a script. But life, I would discover in the most brutal and heartbreaking way, has no script. And one student, a boy of just 17, would teach me that true heroism lies not in the pages of history books, but in the daily struggle for one's existence. His struggle with death changed me forever and taught me to live in a way I never imagined possible. Ethan. He was the kind of student every teacher loves. Intelligent, but not arrogant. Curious, but with a humility that made him genuinely want to learn. He was in my American history class, and I saw him as a future leader, a future architect, a future doctor. He was full of life, with an easy smile and an infectious energy that lit up the classroom. His questions were insightful, his ideas original. He was one of the most promising kids I'd ever taught. If you'd asked me back then, I would have said Ethan's future was bright, a road paved with success and achievement. But what I didn't know was that, for Ethan, the road would become a steep and rocky path, and that his destiny wasn't to become a great professional, but to fight for his life, with a courage that would upend everything I thought I knew about existence. I remember the day the news arrived. It wasn't in a formal meeting or in a letter. It was a phone call from the school principal late on a quiet afternoon. Her voice was choked. She told me, as gently as she could, that Ethan, our Ethan, had been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. The news hit me like a truck. The world stopped. I, so accustomed to routine, to predictability, found myself in a scene of chaos, pain, and injustice. How could such a young boy with so much to live for have been struck by something so cruel? Why him? The classroom, which minutes before had been a place of comfort and order, now felt cold and empty. I didn't know what to feel. The shock was greater than the sadness. It was a denial of reality. It couldn't be true, but it was. The news spread through the school like a shockwave. The hallways, once filled with laughter, were now filled with murmurs and looks of pity. Everyone, without exception, felt helpless. What can you say to a boy fighting for his life? How can you offer comfort when reality itself is so cruel? I, more than anyone, felt lost. How could I, a history teacher who told stories of battles and victories, teach anything to a boy facing the greatest battle of his life? I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the words. I didn't have the wisdom. I felt like an imposter. My classes, my lessons, my lectures on the human resilience of historical figures seemed empty and banal compared to Ethan's reality. But what struck me most, what shocked and inspired me, was Ethan's reaction. He didn't play the victim. He didn't give in to despair. On one of his returns to school, still in the middle of treatments, he sought me out. With his head shaved, his body frailer, he still carried the same sparkle in his eyes. "Mr. Harris," he said, his voice a little lower but firm, "I still want to turn in that essay on the Civil War. I haven't given up." At that moment, I understood. Ethan wasn't just fighting death. He was fighting for life. He was clinging to every shred of normalcy, every shred of future that the disease was trying to steal from him. He wasn't crying in a corner. He was fighting for his dignity. What I didn't know was that this would be just the first of many lessons Ethan would teach me. His struggle, which I thought would be a story of sadness, was actually a saga of unwavering courage, resilience, and an inner strength I'd never seen before. His journey would force me to confront my own frailties and teach me that sometimes the greatest lessons come from those we least expect. This story will show you the true face of courage and make you appreciate every second of your life. If you've ever been deeply impacted by someone's resilience, let yours be yours like in this video. And if you want to find out how Ethan's fight against death taught me how to live, subscribe on the channel and activate the bell, because his journey is just beginning and it will change you forever. Ethan's first essay on the Civil War was the first of many. And with each essay, I saw not only my student's intelligence, but also his unwavering courage. Time became our greatest enemy. Cancer was a shadow hanging over the school. Ethan began missing classes more, frequently a result of chemotherapy sessions and countless days in the hospital. When he returned, the physical impact of the disease was visible. His hair thinned, his skin pale, the exhaustion in his eyes. The entire classroom seemed to walk on eggshells when he was present. The silence was awkward, and the other students' looks, though full of affection, were also filled with pity. Ethan, the boy who had once been full of life, had now become the symbol of our fragility. But what surprised me and what inspired me was his attitude. Ethan refused to be pitied. He didn't want to be the student everyone pitied. He wanted to just be Ethan. The first time he returned to class after a particularly aggressive course of chemotherapy, I tried to treat him with the utmost kindness, but he stopped me. "Mr. Harris," he said with a weak but determined smile, "you can treat me like you always have. I'm still Ethan who loved history. I still want to discuss Lincoln and Grant. Cancer doesn't define me." And with those words, he taught me one of the greatest lessons in dignity I ever hoped to learn. He didn't want the disease to turn him into a story of sadness. He wanted his life, despite all its limitations, to remain a story of life. I began to see the classroom differently, no longer as a place of learning, but as a stage for life. And the protagonist was Ethan. His courage was our daily lesson. His determination to remain steadfast in his tasks, even on his weakest days, was an example of resilience no history book could provide. I began meeting with him after class, not to discuss grades, but to talk about life. He would tell me about his dreams, his passion for architecture, his plans for the future, as if his illness were merely a temporary obstacle in his path. I felt privileged. I, who considered myself an experienced teacher, was actually becoming a student, learning from him about the true strength of the human spirit. But behind all that courage lay a vulnerability. I remember one afternoon when we were in my office talking about the final exam. He was visibly tired. The smile was gone. His head was down. "Ethan," I asked, my heart in my throat, "you don't have to take this if you're not feeling well. We can postpone the exam." He shook his head, and then, his voice breaking, he said something that broke my heart. "Mr. Harris," he whispered, "I'm not afraid of taking the exam. I'm afraid of not having a future to take another one." In that moment, I understood the depth of his pain. It wasn't the pain of cancer. It was the pain of uncertainty, the pain of a future that for him was at risk. And for the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear he hid from everyone, even himself. That confession impacted me more than any class, more than any test. I realized that my struggle as a teacher wasn't just for him to learn history, but for him to believe in his future, for him to have hope. I understood that my mission as a teacher was to be a beacon of hope, and that my role was to fight for him, not against the disease, but against the uncertainty that consumed him. I knew I needed to do more. I needed to show him that his future, even with all the uncertainty, was possible. What I didn't know was that my search for hope and a light at the end of the tunnel for Ethan would lead me to an unexpected discovery, one that would make him see a path he didn't even know existed. And this discovery would take us to a new stage in his struggle, with a strength and purpose that would shock everyone at school. If you've ever felt the pain of consuming uncertainty, or if your hope was rekindled because of someone, let your like in this video. And to find out what happened next and how the professor helped Ethan see a future he didn't think existed, subscribe on the channel and activate the bell. Ethan's true struggle was just beginning, and it would teach us all an unforgettable lesson about the power of hope. Ethan's confession, his fear of not having a future, echoed in my mind for days. I could no longer be just the history teacher who lectured about the past. I needed to fight for his future. My mission was to rekindle Ethan's hope, to show him that his future, however uncertain, was real, tangible, and worth fighting for. I remembered our conversation about architecture, his passion for creating and building. I used my contacts. I called a friend who was a professor at State University and told him about an extraordinary student who had an innate talent for design but was going through a difficult time. I didn't reveal the details of his illness, only that he needed a reason to believe. The result of my search was magical. My friend, impressed by the samples of Ethan's drawings I had brought, not only invited him to visit the architecture department, but also connected him to a community design project. Ethan was hesitant at first, worried he wouldn't have the energy or time, but the prospect of having a purpose outside the hospital and school convinced him. He began working on the project. The hours he spent in the hospital receiving treatments, he spent with a sketchbook in hand, drawing, creating, designing. His face, once pale and tired, now had a new glow, a new energy. The illness was still there, yes, but now there was something more. There was passion, creation, the future. It was as if he were building a bridge to tomorrow, brick by brick, drawing by drawing. His passion became his cure, or at least his greatest strength to fight. I felt victorious. I had managed to give him a reason to fight, to believe in his future. But life, like fate, is a cruel and unpredictable master. What I didn't know was that Ethan's struggle was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The disease, which seemed under control, returned with an aggressiveness that surprised even the doctors. The news hit me hard. Ethan would need to undergo an experimental, risky treatment, with uncertain chances of success. His world, which had just found a new color, returned to black and white. His passion for architecture, his projects, all of it was put in check by the coldness of the diagnosis. The flame of hope, which I had worked so hard to ignite, now struggled to stay alight in the face of a wind stronger than any of us could have anticipated. The hospital corridors became his new classroom, the doctors, his new teachers, and I, the history teacher who felt like an imposter, now found myself visiting Ethan in the hospital, not to talk about history, but to bring him his projects. With each visit, I saw him more frail, more tired, but still, sketchbook in hand. The struggle was lonely, arduous, but his passion for architecture was his greatest weapon. I saw his courage, not in a battle on a battlefield, but in his persistence in fighting for his passion, even when his body betrayed him. And that sight made me question everything. What is courage? What is fighting? What is true heroism? And I, the teacher who thought I was teaching, was actually receiving the most painful and profound lesson of my life. Ethan's health became a mystery. The doctors, his parents, everyone was on the verge of collapse. The future, once a hope, became a prayer. With each day, with each minute, Ethan's life seemed to fade away. What I didn't know was that, precisely at this point of total darkness, a new light would emerge, one that would allow me to see the true meaning of his struggle and the impact his story would have on me. A light that would forever change my outlook on life and death. If you've ever felt a light of hope fade and you had to fight against the darkness, let your like in this video. And to find out what happened next and how the professor managed to see the light he was searching for, subscribe on the channel and activate the bell. The final lesson about life and death was about to be revealed, and it will change you forever. The 6 hours that followed were an eternity. Waiting for news about Ethan's treatment was the hardest thing I had ever faced. My hands were sweating, my heart pounding. I found myself praying, something I, a history teacher focused on facts and dates, hadn't done in years. At that moment, I understood the fragility of life. I understood that no matter how hard we fought, our fate was not in our hands. I sat on a bench in the hallway, the same hallway where doctors walked, the same hallway where families waited for news. And as I waited, I remembered Ethan. I remembered his smile, his passion for architecture, his fear of having no future. I realized that for Ethan, the fight wasn't just to survive. It was to live, to honor every second, to not let the disease turn him into a victim. His struggle taught me that life isn't about the arrival, it's about the journey. And then the news arrived. The doctor approached us. His eyes, once filled with uncertainty, now shone with a new light. He gave us the news we'd been waiting for. The experimental treatment had worked. Ethan was in remission. The battle had been won. The waiting room, once silent, was now filled with tears, tears of relief, of gratitude, of joy. I hugged Ethan's parents and felt part of their victory. It wasn't just Ethan's victory, but all of us who, in some way, had fought alongside him. The classroom, the hospital, the hallways. Everything came together in a celebration of life. Ethan's recovery was a long process, but he faced it with the same courage he had faced the disease. He returned to school, and what I saw was the complete transformation of a boy who had fought for his life and won. He was no longer just Ethan who loved history and architecture. He was Ethan who had fought death and won. He became a leader at school, inspiring other students to fight for their dreams and to cherish every second of life. And I, the teacher who thought I was teaching, was actually receiving the greatest lesson of my life. The lesson Ethan taught me was about the true meaning of courage. It's not the absence of fear, but action despite it. It's not fighting to win, but fighting to live. He taught me that each day, each moment, life is a gift we shouldn't waste. He showed me that resilience isn't a word in a book, but an inner strength that can guide us through the greatest storms. I, who thought of myself as an experienced teacher, was actually becoming a student, learning from him about the true strength of the human spirit. Today, Ethan is a successful architect, and I am a different teacher. My classes are no longer just about dates and facts. They are about life stories, about courage, about resilience. I tell Ethan's story to my students without revealing his identity, to show them that true heroism isn't found in a book, but in the daily struggle for life. My admiration for him is immense. His struggle taught me that life is a gift, and that my mission as a teacher is not just to teach, but to inspire. And that's why today I live each day with a new purpose, a new light. If Ethan's story touched you and made you reflect on the strength of hope, the importance of valuing every second of life, please leave your like in this video. Every like is a way to honor Ethan's struggle and celebrate life. To not miss more stories that inspire us to be better people, subscribe on the channel and activate the bell. I'd love to know, what's your biggest lesson about life and death? Share your experiences and thoughts on comments below. Your story can also inspire. Thank you for joining me on this journey of hope and overcoming. Nessa jornada de esperança e superação. nessa jornada de esperança e superação.